Welcome back, everyone. We've got a new visitor on our channel here, Con, who's from Australia, and we met. I think was it last summer? The summer
Yes, well,
before,
yes, in June.
just so,
Yes, in June.
just in June,
Yeah, the
at
the the
at,
the NAPSI conference.
at the NAPSI conference, and obviously in the time since then, there's been a lot of controversy over the Mahmoud argument,
Yes,
and so you kept in touch and mentioned that you've got a different angle on the argument, and you can basically put the argument in a logical fashion. Maybe you want
yes,
to kind of introduce your concept to the audience.
yes. I think this argument has a lot of legs. I just think that maybe you've got to do it properly. And a bit of background about myself. I'm a medical doctor. And so I'm very used to reading lots of stuff. But my what I do for a day job is I do medico legal work. So I'm very used to reading court reports. I'm very used to reading judges' documents. All of my reports get looked at by judges. So I've got to be very precise with my language. And that's been a help in this because it helps me look at what can I say, what can't I say, and then to use sort of when I can say something, use more definitive words. When I can't say something, use a little bit more nuance. Um, and I think that's what's been missing in this, because the whole hoo-ha is really, I think it's a storm in a teacup, really, and it's I mean it's be a big storm, but when you look at the evidence, I don't think there's any problem with using the Mahmoud argument if we use it properly.
Yeah. I think
So
one of the difficulties was um, when I initially set out the argument. It was very basic, in terms of laying out, and I
mm,
was passing on what Robert Kerr had given to me. So that was as far as it
yes,
went. And then the second step of it was Jay Smith then took it and interpreted it a certain way and presented it
yeah,
and and probably over presented it, over
yes,
delivered on it.
yes,
But then the third step was when others basically strawmanned our argument by saying that we were
yes,
arguing for like 100% certainty with very specific demands for evidence for that to be
yes,
proven. And I unfortunately I bought the bait on that last one,
yes,
and then I got myself into trouble when I trusted AI too much because AI is still relatively new for me, and I was
yes,
a bit naive. So anyway, I've
yes,
kind of stepped back from that and said, okay, let's look at the evidence
yeah,
again, and
yeah,
you've actually sort of gone to analyze it
yeah.
at a level that I haven't, looking at it from
Okay,
a different angle. So yeah,
yeah.
so back to you.
All right. Well, away we go. And I'll preface this by saying that I have actually sent my presentation to Professor Kerr, and he had some good points that I might cover later on. But he says here, I've looked over your presentation. It makes its point clearly, and then he's got a couple of points on oral tradition and stuff. So I took that as okay, I've got Robert Kerr's blessing. I mean, and he gave me a few minor corrections, but yeah. So basically, I call this "What's in a name," and we're looking for was there really a Muhammad in the seventh century? So as everybody would know, the foundation of Islam is Muhammad. I know everyone thinks the foundation of Islam is the Quran, okay, but it's not because the standard Islamic narrative rests on the Sunnah of the Prophet, okay. 85% of Muslims are Sunni, and as we know, the Quran on its own, you can't get any of the five pillars, can you, Mel? You can't get the Hajj from the
No,
Quran. No,
yeah,
you can't get the ablutions. You can get maybe three prayers according to Al-Fadi, but you can't get the five prayers. Okay. You need the Sunnah, and that comes from the Hadith. All right. The problem is the Hadith are based on oral tradition that we're supposed to accept as reliable because the Muslim concept of Hadith science says that they're reliable. So can you see a problem with that? It's a circular argument. I think everybody should be able to see that's arguing in a circle. X is true because A says X is true, and whatever A says is true is true. Now, thinking people won't accept that, so we need to look at something that is non-circular, in other words, outside the Islamic sources. So now, one thing I want to raise right at the beginning is, and I'll mention his name because this is, the Raymond Ibrahim versus Jay Smith debate. All right. Raymond Ibrahim says he believes in a bare bones Muhammad, and basically said, well, that's enough to say that for him, the Muhammad of the sin is historical, because all he needs to find is a bare bones Muhammad. Okay. Now, as we'll see, the question we've got to ask ourselves, is that a valid way to do things? So, what's a bare bones Muhammad? They say that some who shared the same base. I mean, do you remember when Raymond Ibrahim said that during the debate?
Yes, I do.
No. Yeah.
Yes. It sounds like, um, say you're dealing with Shakespeare, right? And you say,
Yeah.
well, I found a playwright in the 16th century, so therefore
Yeah.
Shakespeare existed.
And he might have been
So
born somewhere in whatever section of England Stratford or Avon was, you know,
yeah,
and so that's William Shakespeare. Now, obviously, that's a good analogy, and as we'll see, I think everybody would agree that's not a valid way to do history. So, what's the bare bones of Muhammad they're talking about? Oh, well, there was an Arab leader from the 7th century. Some regarded him as a prophet, and he fought battles and led armies. Okay, but is this the right way to test the historical reliability of the sin? No, it isn't. Now, we need a lot more than bare bones because, someone might say, well, who does this complement more? But I would submit humbly that Mel and I look very much the same if you take all of our soft tissues off.
yeah,
Your
yeah,
skeleton and my skeleton looks very much the same, all right? But
yeah,
are we the same person? Obviously not. Our unique physical appearance is due to soft tissues, muscle, skin, hair. Sorry, that's the medico in me coming out, but I couldn't.
yeah, yeah.
But
That's
do
okay.
you get the point? You get the
Yeah,
point, right?
absolutely.
This idea of bare bones is not enough. As a matter of fact, when they discover a skeleton, can they identify who that individual is? No, they can't. Maybe the only way they can do it is dental records. And that
Yeah,
okay, and then they have to find some form of DNA that they can use, all right? But the bones themselves
yeah,
is not enough. So
yeah.
in the
And
same
it,
way,
it
sorry.
correct me if I'm wrong as well. Say if we take the case of DNA, if there's something like is it 1% difference, you have a chimpanzee or something.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. That five
it could be
percent,
massive,
but
or five
yeah,
percent, but it could be for even like a small difference.
yes,
It could
that's
be
right. But
huge
the point of
differences
the
in
analogy
things.
is that you find a set of bones. Can you
Yeah,
identify the person just from the appearance of the bones? No, you can't, right?
can't.
So
Okay.
no, so if we're going to find the Muhammad of Islam, he's got to be much more than bare bones. This guy, because the Islamic sources paint a picture of a very unique individual. He's got a full complement of muscle, skin, hair, and eyes, metaphorically speaking, of course. Okay. So this Muhammad will be very different from any other Arab leader from the 7th century. Okay. Pointing to an Arab leader who may have been a warlord or even a prophet and saying that this is the Muhammad of the sin, just because they share the same basic attributes, is like saying that two individuals are the same person just because they share the same basic skeleton. So obviously
Yeah.
that's not valid, is it?
It's not, and actually, even if you work within the Hadith traditions, they admit, or at least they say that there are multiple prophets from that time.
Yeah,
So even
but
they
but
even they can't suggest that if by saying someone is a prophet that is in itself unique.
yeah,
So that's a
yeah,
problem.
yeah, but well, that's right. But that's parallel to what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this idea that just because we find a bare bones Muhammad, that's the Muhammad of the sin. It's not. Okay. The Muhammad of the sin, we need the Muhammad of the sin. And the Muhammad of the sin for your listeners is standard Islamic narrative. The Muhammad of the sin was born in Mecca in 570, received the Quran in AD 610 to 632, taught his followers the religion of Islam by oral tradition. He ruled, and this is important, he ruled from Mecca and Medina only. He never went outside of the Arabian Peninsula. He
Yeah.
conquered most of the Arabian Peninsula by the time of his death in 632. We need that Muhammad. Does it make sense? We need that
Yeah.
Muhammad. That's the Muhammad we need to
Absolutely. Yeah.
find. And and if we don't find that Muhammad, then the sin is not then the Muhammad of the sin doesn't exist historically. And it's reasonable to say that. Okay. So
Yes. Yeah.
we'll look at some fundamental questions. Okay, we're going to look at how does oral transmission actually work? Question two, how can we tell if oral transmission is reliable? Question three, why are non-Muslim sources so important? And question four, we're going to do a bit of phonetics. Okay. All the teachers out there will enjoy that, especially the English teachers. Um, so how does oral transmission work? Try and look at it very simply. Okay, oral transmission works like this: person A tells person B, who tells person C. But looking at it another way, person C hears it from person B, who heard it from person A. Right. So the bottom line, it's what people are hearing that determines whether a message transmitted orally is actually transmitted without any changes. The hearing is important. Okay. And if the message is written down years later, then what is written down must be consistent with what the first transmitters would have heard. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
we've got to actually be able to show that, okay, what they wrote down is what would have been said and heard at the time it was allegedly said and heard. All right. So, and again, looking at things from some basic fundamentals. Let's say oral transmission is reliable, and let's say we've got a given community C. Let's just call the community C. They're telling stories to each other inside the community. Now, for whatever reason, and I put this for whatever reason because people say, and I'll cover this now because in case I forget it later, that the sin says that the hadith were not written down originally, right? And Muhammad's teachings were not written down originally, they were transmitted orally. Then they try and say, oh, yeah, but the Arabs had writing, all right? Well, who cares whether the Arabs had writing? They didn't write them down. You see? Like
Yeah.
when we talk about the defective script, etc., we'll get to later. They say, "Oh, you guys are disingenuous because the Arabs had writing," and they point to the scripts, the inscriptions that are in Hijaz and Al Jalad's work and all that stuff. Okay, so the Arabs had some kind of writing, but the question is, did the Muslims, the sin, did they write them down? No, they didn't. Why?
So
Why
to
they didn't write them down? I don't know, but they didn't write them down.
yeah, to
You
use
see?
an analogy, they don't, or not an analogy maybe, but they don't have the receipts. They have the
No, they
claim.
don't have that. No, that's right. They don't
Yeah,
have the receipts. And why they don't have the receipts, we're not going to speculate. Maybe they did have them,
yeah,
maybe they lost them. Maybe they never had them, you know?
yeah.
But whatever reason, we don't have, they say, and it's not like that. Actually, it's different, Mel, with due respect. It's not that they
Yeah.
don't have the receipts. They say they never had the receipts. They were never written down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You see, to say that we don't have the receipts means implies that once we did have the receipts, correct?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
there
Yeah,
could have, there were never receipts. That's what they're saying.
yeah. So
So,
this is really the worst case situation for them. They're trying to
yes,
prove
because they're
something that
saying
can't be
this is
proven.
what their sources are saying that, not us,
Yeah, yeah,
right? So basically, the community doesn't write them down. The people hear the stories, tell others. Years or decades later, they write these stories down for whatever reason. Again, for whatever reason. If the oral transmission is truly reliable, then what is written should match what the people in the original community were saying, and what they were saying should match what they heard. Okay, so therefore, what is written should match what was originally heard. That's just simple logic. But how can we know what they heard? Because we weren't there, right? But imagine there was another community that was outside this community C, but close enough to hear those same stories. Let's call that community O. The outsiders are hearing the insider stories. If they're hearing the insider stories, they should also be hearing what the insiders are hearing. Does that make sense?
yeah,
If they're all hearing the same stories, then the outsiders are hearing the same thing that the insiders are hearing. And so these outsiders are, in effect, a kind of independent eyewitness to the
yeah,
insider's oral tradition. Imagine these outsiders have a language that they can write down what the insiders are saying. And it's a proper language. It's not a defective script, as we'll see later. Okay. And let's say they write it down at the time of the oral transmission, in other words, at the beginning, and they write it down, then it should be an accurate eyewitness record of what the insiders were originally saying. Follow that?
yeah,
Now, imagine that decades later, again, for whatever reason, the insiders decide to write their traditions down. Okay. And if we compare what the insiders wrote decades later with what the outsiders wrote earlier, they should be the same if the transmission is reliable. If they're very different, then what the insiders write later is unlikely to be an accurate record of the original transmission. Correct?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So this is where I'm going through this basically for our listeners so they can see, you know, how this works. It's just simple common sense. And we actually have some non-Muslim sources. Now, the Islamic sources say that the first Muslims were an oral culture who passed Muhammad's teaching down orally. As we've seen, this is a circular argument, and there's a time gap of nearly 300 years before his teachings were written down. That's pretty common knowledge. But there are non-Islamic 7th century writers who do write around the same time as Muhammad, and that the first Muslims are supposed to have lived. See, again, assuming the sin is true, when they say he lived, there are these people living around the same time. Some of those sources, they write about an Arab conquest and even an Arab prophet. Now, these non-Islamic sources are also free of any Islamic bias. Okay, so they give us a better idea of what was actually happening in the 7th century Middle East. If what these non-Islamic sources write about the Arabs is consistent over decades and centuries, in other words, what the non-Islamic sources write in the 7th century is similar to the 8th century, then the tradition is reliable, isn't it? The information is reliable. If it's preserved, so it's more likely. So we and then we can look at what did these 7th century non-Islamic writers write and the 8th century ones. And if we see that they're the same, well, then that's the same. And if that's different to what the Islamic sources say, then we've got a big problem. Okay, as I say,
so just
yeah,
to kind of to summarize, so essentially those non-Islamic 7th century sources can be used as a litmus test on the
yes,
reliability of the hadiths.
100%,
Yeah.
100%, yeah, or the reliability of Muhammad, because remember this is about Muhammad. So, because if they don't talk about other things in the hadith, so I'm really just looking at was there the Muhammad of Islam? Okay,
Yeah.
so let's get something clear because I don't want people to misinterpret and saying, "Oh, you guys, you're saying there's no these guys wrote about hadiths and they didn't." No, 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 no. I'm saying that these non-Islamic sources wrote about an Arab prophet. Okay, we'll see what they call him, and if they don't write about the Muhammad of the sin, then the Muhammad of the sin, it's reasonable to conclude that the Muhammad of the sin didn't exist. Okay, again, the Muhammad of Islam, that's the Muhammad we're looking for. Remember, not the bare bones, the guy with the skin, muscle, hair, and eyes. Okay, so we get some more fundamentals. Let's look at some phonetics. If the people inside the community are using oral transmission and to transmit a word, they're hearing words, right? They're hearing a word that's one syllable, two syllable, or three syllable, whatever the case may be. If they write it down, they should write a word one syllable, two syllable, or three syllable. Okay? So, for example, if I hear Mel, okay, you say your name Mel, and I write down Melvin, I haven't heard Mel, have I?
And actually,
No,
on that point, it's much easier to make out syllables than even the individual sounds. So that's a very
that's right.
definite thing because
That's right.
it's the
So
beat of the word, if you like.
that's right. Syntax. Okay. So basically, and we'll see why that's important. But let's say that that community write it down in a consonantal script. In other words, with no vowels. Okay, we're going to call that CSC, consonantal script C.
Yeah.
The problem is it's got no vowels, so it's difficult, or if not impossible, to know exactly what they're saying. And we call it a defective script. A defective script because you can't transmit something properly without the original sounds. That's why it's called a defective script. And as we know, 7th century Arabic was a defective script. We'll get to that a bit later. All right. Now, phonetics, the value of vowels. It's only when this community adds vowels to their consonant that we know how to pronounce the words they were saying. Now, this could occur up to a century later. So we'll call this vowel script C. So we had consonant script C for community C and vowel script C. But given the passage of so much time, isn't it possible that they have made some changes in the words? Yes, it is. But how many changes were there? How different would these changes be? What's the explanation for the changes? Were they intentional or unintentional? Well, we can't really answer that unless we look at the vowels. And as we'll see, certain vowels can be easily substituted and certain vowels cannot. All right, let's have a look at that. What I mean by that. Because when we make vowels, we actually have a mouth shape, as I've got here. Okay, when you make the sound a and your mouth and people can't see me, but Mel, if you make the sound a and you've got a similar shaped mouth.
Yeah.
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 All right. Okay. E, o, similar shaped mouth. O, slightly different shaped mouth. Look at ooh. oohs are very different.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, um, is it possible that if someone was hearing ooh to actually mistakenly substitute it for a?
No, there's no
No,
way.
it's less likely.
So
It's unlikely, isn't it? I mean, anything's
yeah.
possible. Let me rephrase that. It's possible, but is it likely? Is it reasonable? No, it isn't. Okay. So here's the point. If later writers use oo and earlier ones use a or ah, then it's much less likely that the a become an oo by mistake. That's the point.
Yes.
See,
Yeah.
see if a or ah becomes oo, you can't say that, or it's less likely that it was unintentional. It was more likely that it's intentional because it's such a distinction. It's such a distinct sound difference, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's also much more likely that the earlier speakers were saying "a" rather than "oo." All right. Now, this is going to be quite relevant for Muhammad, as we'll say, or Muhammad, okay, as we'll see. When vowels collide, as we saw, the people outside the community, we'll call them community O, write with both vowels and consonants. Vowel script O, VSO, because it's got vowels and consonants, it's not a defective script. That's the key point. The community script is defective. This one's not. So the outsiders write down what the insiders are saying at the same time, and it gives us a much better idea. The litmus test, as you saw before, it's like an eyewitness account. As we saw, let's say that later on the insiders add vowels to make their vowel script. So we end up with two vowel scripts: the vowel script O that was used by the outsiders, and the vowel script C used by the insiders. But here's the point: the outsider script is a lot earlier. The insider script comes a lot later. So the outsider's script is the eyewitness test. It's the litmus test. And if
Yes.
what is written and if what is written in the insider script, which comes later, is different from what is written in the outsider script, which is the eyewitness, then is it likely that the insider script reflects the original transmission? No, it isn't. You follow that?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
good
Okay.
way of
So
looking at it.
just in yeah, just in a timeline form, okay, you've got the oral community C has story S, AD 630s. At the same time, the outsiders have their vowel script, which is not a defective script. For whatever reason, again, don't shoot rocks, don't throw rocks at us people. We're not saying the Arabs didn't have writing, but for whatever reason, they didn't write it down. They choose, for reasons only known to them, that to use oral transmission. But the outsiders hear the story and write it down. Let's say we're assuming that the Islamic narrative is true. Okay. The outsiders write it down. Okay. And they call it text O. Because it's not defective, then text O is an eyewitness account for the story. Make sense? So again,
Absolutely.
let's
Yeah.
assume that the sin is true, okay, that they did use oral transmission and it was reliable. Then what the outsiders write down should be should is a reliable eyewitness account. Later on, the insiders write their story in the consonantal script, but it's defective. That's AD 700s. And then the 9th century, they finally write down in a vowel script. I mean, it might be earlier than the 9th century, but it's about decades or a century later. They finally add their vowels, okay, and they write it down later. And let's call this text C. Remember, we have text O written by the outsiders, text C written by the insiders, okay, and text C comes a lot later. Let's compare what's written, okay. If text C is not the same as text O, then text C is not what the original community was saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm just because your listeners will follow. I mean, it looks like a lot of words, but I think it's fairly simple common sense that we've got the earlier eyewitness account that's in a not in a defective script. The later one that's not in a defective script. If they're different, the earlier is more likely to represent the truth than the later one. Okay, so I'll give a Practical example. Okay, imagine that there was an oral community and they write down a word DMNS. Okay. How would they have pronounced it? Who knows? We can't say without the vowels. All right. Now imagine the people outside the community that are hearing the same word, okay, and they write it with their vowel script. And some people might write damnas, some people might write demnos, Some people might write dimins. Some people might even write demons. All right. Notice that all these are two-syllable words and that the two vowels are roughly consistent with each other. Make sense?
Yeah.
So this is a hypothetical example, right? So is it conceivable that someone hearing demnos could write damnas? Yes, it is. Especially if you're speaking fast, right?
Yeah.
Right. But imagine that decades later, the people inside the community get their non-defective script, they put their vowels, and they write the same word as dominus. Dominus. Now, is that a two-syllable word?
It's not, no, three. Yeah.
It's three
Big
syllables.
difference.
It's got how many vowels now? Three vowels, not two.
Three vowels, yeah.
Okay. And the vowels you can't really substitute, especially the at for the u, dominus. That's a big problem. You see? So is it really likely that the people inside the original community were saying dominus? No, I humbly submit that no, it isn't. Yeah. They could have been saying damnas, they could have been saying demnos, they could have been saying, but not dominus. Okay?
Yeah.
So how does this relate to Islam? Well, in the 7th century, we've got coins and inscriptions that have MHMD, Mim Ha Mim Dal, with no vowels. Now, some have asserted, now you know about the coins, a lot of people probably know about the coins. I like to use all the three kinds of coins personally. You got the Christian coins, you got the Jewish menorah coins, and you got the Zoroastrian coins that have got Mahmad or MHMD, right? But there are no vowels, so we don't know how to pronounce that, really. But the word Muhammad has three vowels and three syllables. Muhammad. It's pronounced Muhammad. All right? So if the earliest Arabs were actually saying Muhammad, then the non-Arabs that were hearing them should have written a word with three syllables and three vowels. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
So
very good.
As we've seen previously, when we're talking about going from hearing to writing, the vowels are the key. Yeah. The vowels are the key. Because when you think about it, consonants, you can run them together, D and T, M and N, right? If you're from the Philippines, F and P, right? But the vowels are very unique, and so that's why I think this is something that hasn't been mined before, all right? And that's why I think it's a novel argument. It's not necessarily an academic argument, but it makes sense. It's a logical argument, and I have yet to see somebody refute it. Now, in the 7th century, we had writers writing in Greek. Here's the thing. Unlike Arabic, Greek has a long tradition of writing with both consonants and vowels. Okay, now I'm not a Greek scholar, but I'm a Greek speaker. My parents are from, Cyprus, the Greek part. I can speak Greek reasonably well. I can read and write it. Okay. So if Greek speakers were actually hearing Muhammad, they would have written something like Muhammad if they were hearing using the chai, or they could have used Muhammad or Muhammad, because Greek has like a soft H. So you can put the little squiggle above the A, right? So you could get away with it that way.
You can cover both possibilities.
Yeah. But there would be three syllables, right? Okay. Yeah. So it would either be Muhammad, Muhammad, something like that. All right? Three syllables, three vowels. As we saw previously, while it is possible to substitute O for U, in other words, Muhammad for Muhammad, it is much harder to substitute A for U. So it's much harder to go from Mamed to Mumad. Yeah. Okay? And it's even harder to go from Mamed to Muhammad. Yeah. You see that? So I'm trying to give them benefit of the doubt here. Okay, let's just say that I mean, if it was Muhammad, you might say that they wouldn't have written Mumad. Okay? Like I say, you can go from Mamed to Mumad. I don't think you can, but let's say you can. But it's even harder to go from Mamed to Muhammad. Okay? Yeah. So let's have a look and see what they actually wrote. So I've got here a list of what the sources in the 7th century and the 8th century write about. So there's a fragment on the Arab conquest. It's a Syriac source. It's commonly called the flyleaf, right? You probably know that one. It calls the Tayyaya of MWHMD in Syriac. No vowels. Thomas the Presbyter mentions the Tayaye de Mahmat, MHMT. Note that he uses the Persian spelling. Also, interestingly, he says that this Mahmad fought in Gaza. Now, did the Muhammad of Islam go to Gaza?
Never been.
Mel, sorry?
Yeah, no,
He never went to
he
Gaza,
never
did
went
he?
to Gaza according to the standard Islamic narrative. No.
That's exactly right. Forget, we're talking about the standard Islamic narrative. That's why I said the Muhammad of Islam, because the Muhammad of Islam is from the so whenever I say the Muhammad of Islam, I'm talking about the standard Islamic narrative. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm using that specific language. The Khuzestan Chronicles of the 660s uses MHMT. The Maronite Chronicle of the 660s uses MHMT. Interestingly, the Maronite Chronicle says Jerusalem is Muhammad's throne, as you remember. Okay, and that's another story, but that's a rabbit trail we could go down, but we won't. Okay, and the only reason I mention it is because certain people who've thrown rocks at you, Mel, use the Maronite Chronicle talking about the coins, but they don't read the rest of it to talk about
No, no.
Muawiyah going to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, going to Golgotha to pray, and not wanting to rule from Jerusalem because it's Muhammad's throne. I mean, that's not a Muslim who does that.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
So I only mention that in passing because you've taken a bit of flack from certain people that I think has been undeserved because, again, they don't read the whole story. But this is the one that's interesting. Sabaeus, he writes in Greek, he mentions the Arab leader Mahmet with a soft H, Mahmet, right? Okay. And he talks about this Mahmet leading 12,000 Jews. Did the Muhammad of Islam ever lead 12,000? Did the Muhammad of Islam ever lead an army of one Jew?
Not that I heard of.
Not that I heard.
Yeah,
He killed a
it's a
few
very different
Jews.
person. Yeah,
It is. He killed a few Jews, didn't he? The
yeah,
Jewish
yeah,
tribes, I think the Banu Kanuka, the Banu, but he never led the army of 12,000 Jews. And if memory serves me correctly, this is not in the Hijaz, this fight. Okay. This is up in,
yeah.
Jordan and Iraq. Okay. But the key point for our argument is what does Sabaeus call him? What does Sabaeus call him, Mel?
Mehmet. So
Mahmet. That's it.
not, yeah, not
No,
Muhammad.
not Muhammad. He calls him Mahmet. And look at that.
Yeah,
Sabaeus is 660s. John of Damascus in 730. Now, you've done a video on whether, maybe John of Damascus isn't 8th century, and I won't dispute that. Let's assume he is, because it's actually, either way. But let's assume he is 8th century. John of Damascus, 730, mentions the false prophet Mahmed, used with a soft H. Also, he uses the word, and I'm going to find the translation of it.
while
Um,
you're looking for that, I
I
just
found it.
wanted to
Yeah.
clarify that the point about John of Damascus, and this is coming from Robert Kerr, Professor Kerr, is that he
Yeah.
believes that the passage to do with Muhammad there is an interpolation added to
Yeah.
John of Damascus's
Yeah.
writings.
Yeah. And
now I have no way of telling, but either way, that only makes it later.
yes.
But the point is still valid,
Yes, and Professor Kerr could well be right, but let's assume that this is that it isn't an interpolation, all right? Because the word that he uses is a word called epanosamenos. Yeah, no, eponomazamenos. From onoma means name. Now, one way you could translate that is a person who's named that, who's called that, but you can also translate that word as so-called. Okay, so-called. You see? So, so this raises the possibility, and again, I'm being nuanced with my words, that the word Mahmet is not a proper name. He uses this word, so-called. It could be translated. One way to translate it is so-called. Okay, and I've got some examples. Okay, translated. Responsible for the separatist government activity. This is just from the internet. Responsible for the separatist governmental activities of the so-called government of the Donetsk People's Republic, blah, blah, blah. This is about the war in Ukraine. But this Greek document translated as so-called. Okay?
Yeah.
So now, but the key is Mahmed. That's the key. Mahmed. How many syllables in that word, Mel?
Two
How many syllables? What are the vowels?
So it's the and the
Eh. Yeah. Are there three syllables? What does Muhammad have?
Three syllables.
Yeah, Muhammad's got and ah. Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, I'll go back. So I think we can all agree that John of Damascus, if he wouldn't have written Muhammad by mistake if he was hearing Muhammad. Unlikely, isn't
Definitely.
it?
No. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially
So
how
I
smart
think,
John was.
yeah.
Because
Like
remember John. Sorry, just to get this thought. Remember, John was working in the court of Abdul Malik as his, sort of almost his treasurer. So he was
Yeah.
a smart man.
Yeah. And
You see?
he's an insider as well because he's
Yeah,
working with the top people at the time.
that's right.
He's
That's
within the
right.
regime.
So that's right. So let's have a look at an analysis. So we've got an analysis of. So we see not Muhammad, but Muhammad. This is what the evidence tells us. Archaeological and written sources confirm that there was an Arab leader or prophet that was mentioned in the 7th century on coins, inscriptions, and in written sources. Those without vowels call him MHMD. I'll just verbalize it Mahmad, just for the sake of, some call him Mahmet or Mahmat, and Mahmad, Mawahmat, or whatever that works out to be. I'm not sure how you vocalize that W in Syriac. Okay, but those with vowels call him Mahmet or Mahmed. Okay, that's the key. The Greek sources call him Mahmet, and going back here. Okay, Sebius is 660s. John of Damascus is 60 years later, 60 to 70 years later. So we can see stability in that tradition. That's my point. We see stability there. All right. So people would have been, if they were talking about this Arab person, you know, they were calling him the same thing in the 660s as they were calling him in the 730s. All right. So when we're not being unreasonable,
So
okay, they can.
they're hearing it. So it's not just a blip. They're hearing it consistently over
Yes,
decades
yeah,
in the
yeah,
same way.
yeah.
And
So those
that's the
with
key point.
that's right. Those with vowels call him Mahmet or Mahmed. They continue to call him this over 70 years. So this confirms that the people were actually saying a name with only two syllables and two vowels. But Muhammad has three syllables and three vowels. And also the vowels are not easily interchangeable. U for A. Now, I've written the U there. So you might think, so people don't think, oh, that's a A sound. No, no. In Arabic, that U is U, as in school.
Yeah.
All right. It's Muhammad. And we can talk about
Just
another video, and I'm happy to do another video. And when we talk about the vowel structures and Hebrew versus Arabic, but just for this, right? Okay, you wouldn't substitute u for a. So if people were actually hearing Muhammad, they would not have written down Mahmed. It's much more likely that they were actually hearing Mahmed. That's my proposition. Okay.
yeah,
So
to use two common words like schooled, very different.
yeah,
People can hear it
yeah,
straight
very
away.
different. Very
Yeah,
different. You can that's a
yeah,
good way to put it.
yeah.
Okay. So question, are the Islamic claims for oral transmission reliable? Well, the Sin claims that we can know all about the Prophet Muhammad because of the power of their oral tradition. But an analysis of the historical sources and linguistics strongly suggests that there was no Muhammad in the 7th century. There may have been a Muhammad, but there was no Muhammad. So if the Sin cannot even verify that their oral tradition got the name of their prophet right, how can we trust any of the other Sin claims based on this oral tradition? Okay, and when we combine this with the 200 to 300 year gap between the death of Muhammad and the earliest biographies, we have good reason to be skeptical of the claims made by the Sin. I don't think that's unreasonable.
No.
So, and I'll just read out a bit about what Professor Kerr said about oral tradition. Okay, there has been actually, no, I'll leave that to the end. Okay, the name or noun. All right, because this is something that you got pilloried for, and I don't think you were on the wrong track. I just think we might need to be a bit more nuanced about the words we use. Okay, I don't think we should use the word title unless we've got evidence, but we can use the word name or as I use predicate. Okay, we often see certain words being used in more than one way. Sometimes they're predicates, and the English teachers out there know that a predicate is a word that describes a person or a thing. Sometimes it uses proper names. This is especially the case if these words describe something that is good or wanted. For example, okay, Mel, you're a good Catholic, yeah?
I hope so. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So who was the Pope before Francis?
Yeah. So it was Pope Benedict,
Benedict. Okay.
which I
What
know
was his
would
name?
be Benedictus in Latin.
Yes,
Yeah.
Benedictus in Latin. Okay, means blessed. Well, as we see, the word Benedictus can be used as a descriptive predicate in the hymn, the Sanctus. Okay, there's a Latin hymn, Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Right? I'm sure you've heard that hymn before. But as we've just pointed out, the Pope before Francis was Benedictus. So if you see the word Benedictus written down, do you automatically assume, okay, just because they've written that down, the Islamic logic is that, okay, whenever they see the word Mahmed, that's Muhammad, right? Like in Song of Solomon and all that stuff. Well, that's like saying that, okay, Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini means that Pope Benedict comes in the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
Is that reasonable?
No, not at all.
No, it isn't. Okay. So in the same way, the word Muhammad can be used in Arabic as both a predicate and a name. As a predicate, it would mean the praised one, the desired one, or even possibly the chosen one. Okay. So if Benedictus doesn't necessarily have to refer to a man named Benedictus, then Muhammad doesn't necessarily have to refer to a man named Muhammad. Okay. Or the word Muhammad. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now let's have a look at MHMD through the millennia. You've covered this, so I'm summarizing stuff you may have covered on some of your videos, but this is all widely available. As we know, we've got Ugaritic tablets from the 14th, 15th century that have the word MHMD being used to describe gold, and the sort of word, the meaning of the word is coveted. Okay, right? We've got the word MHMD used in the Hebrew Bible a number of times, especially in Lamentations chapter 1 and chapter 2, to describe desired things. Okay? Mahmadin, just things that are desired. And it's got nothing to do with the Prophet Muhammad. It just, in Lamentations, the Lord says, I'm going to all your desired things are going to be destroyed. Well, that word desired things is Mahmad. All right? Song of Solomon 5:16. Okay, the word Mahmad is used in a plural form in Hebrew because it's describing the beloved as altogether lovely. Why a plural form? Because it's describing multiple features of the beloved. That's my view. Okay, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but it just makes perfect sense. Now, as you've covered extensively, multiple church fathers, including Augustine and Ambrose, interpreted this passage, Song 5, and even the whole Song of Solomon, as being about Jesus Christ, the bride and the bridegroom.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to be clear, so we don't. This was a bone of contention. In terms of the evidence for this would be that the overall interpretation of Song of Songs we're not specifying
and
specifically that we're talking. We're not quote mining here and saying 5:16 was referenced by these.
But these. No, it's not these writers were interpreting the Song of Solomon as an allegory about the bride and the bridegroom. And why do we have it in our Bibles today? Because we as Christians believe the same thing. We believe that today. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Orthodox. So I was just saying, by Orthodox I mean like non-heretical Christianity. They would all hold to that. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Keep cutting through you. Sorry. Go ahead. Let's you finish.
Yeah, I'll just because there might be some of your questions. So my contention here is that Christians reading their writing would see the altogether lovely one as referring. Okay, this would include Christians in the Middle East. So here's the point. I know that those church fathers didn't write in Arabic or Aramaic. We're not saying that. I'm not saying that. Okay? He's not in Arabic or Aramaic. But a Christian in Jerusalem, sure. So as we've seen, a lot of people have interpreted Song 5:16 as being about Jesus Christ. Okay, and that the altogether lovely one, referring to Jesus. And any Christian in the Middle East that read their writings would have seen that. Now, again, here's the point. We're not saying that those church fathers wrote in Arabic or Aramaic. Some of them might have, okay? But others might have written in Greek or in Latin or whatever. But the point is that a Christian who was familiar with their work and read Song 516 in Hebrew, Aramaic, or even Arabic would have heard the term Muhammad being equated with Jesus. That's the point. It's the connection, being connected, maybe not equated. Okay, I'll withdraw that word, but connected with Jesus. That's not unreasonable. Okay, um, so no, this does not necessarily mean that Muhammad is a title for Jesus, but merely that over time the word Muhammad could well have come to be associated with Jesus for Christians in the Middle East. Okay, and is that unreasonable, Mel?
Well, I think it's a fair
Do you think
assumption, and
I'm
that's
drawing too long a bow?
no. And I think as long as we don't make a big meal out of this argument and see it for what it
No.
is, it's an inference that
Yeah.
can be logically made. There's
Yeah.
something
And
else that strengthens this just contextually, is that
yeah.
the Hebrew word that's contained in 516, actually within a few words of Mahmadim, is Dodi, my beloved. Now, why is
Yes.
that important? Because the word David,
Yes.
the root of the word means beloved.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
therefore,
David. Dawood. Yeah.
so you have David, Dawood, um, means beloved, and then you have altogether lovely. The two concepts fit together.
Yes. Yes. That's
The
right.
and
And
the other
keep
thing
going.
is, in I think it's in the same chapter. It talks about my beloved is knocking on the door. Now, if you go to Revelation, you have
Yeah. Revelation
Saint
3.
John.
Tw
St.
yeah.
John is intertextually linking back to Song of
Yeah.
Songs and
Yes.
having
Yes.
Jesus to be the one who's knocking. So it's
Knocking. I
very
behold, I stand
reasonable.
at the door and knock. Yes. Yes. And
So it's
and
very
and, and none of
reasonable
that's
for Christians
unreasonable.
who know. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
reasonable for Christians then, or anyone to read 516 and say, "Oh, this is a messianic um, passage,"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
See.
this is just me. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. No. What you're saying, Mel, if I is you're not saying this is exactly what is meant, but you're saying that people who read it and who knew Revelation, okay,
Yes.
could make that connection. It's not unreasonable
Absolutely.
for them
Yeah.
to make that connection, and that's what we're
Yeah.
saying. Okay,
Yeah.
so here is predicate for the praise one. Okay, we have Christian commentary on Song of Songs 516 could have led to Muhammad becoming a descriptive word or predicate for Jesus. Okay, over time. But here's the thing, you know this inscription. The 523 Yemeni inscription in Sabbaic Arabic script mentions the Lord of the Jews with the Muhammad. Okay, is that the Muhammad of Islam?
Can't be, obviously. Can't be.
No, it can't be.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
70 years before him, right? So this is most likely a predicate for a praised one of the Jews. Okay, possibly their coming Messiah. All right. So not only is this completely inconsistent with the Prophet Muhammad of the sin, it's, as we said, it's more than 50 years before he was even born. So what I'm trying to do here is we shouldn't allow Muslims to say, oh, there's an inscription that's got MHMD, so that's the Prophet Muhammad. No, it isn't. Just like if they see an inscription that's got Umar or Uthman in Arabic, that fits with the Umar, the Uthman of the sin. Not necessarily. That you've got to show me more evidence. You know?
Yeah, and for the same reasons as well. We are not saying that in 516 it's a prophecy about Muhammad either.
No, no, we're not.
We're
We're
saying
not.
it has a different meaning. It has a
That's right.
different
But
sense.
yeah, but what I'm saying is it can't be Muhammad anyway because the Hebrew's got vowels and it's Mahmad, right?
Yes.
And we've got the Mahmad, the Lord of the Jews, and the Mahmad in Sabbaic script, okay, from 523. Muhammad's
Yes.
born in 570, right? So there are Mahmads before Muhammad, right, of the sin. And look at this, the coins from the 7th century, as we've alluded to before, you've got Mahmad with Christian symbols such as crosses or fish. One coin's got the 3 crosses. I like the fish one from Galilee because I think that one, if memories, I could be wrong, but if
Yeah.
memory serves me
Just saw that.
correctly, the inscription says Muhammad Rasulullah with a
Yeah.
fish.
Yes.
And then you've got and all that is the praise one is the messenger of God. You've got Muhammad with Zoroastrian symbols and Muhammad with a Jewish lampstand. Okay, none of this is consistent with the Prophet of Islam. That's my contention. That's my proposition. Okay, Is any of that? Well, you tell me, Mel. Is any of that those coins? Is any of that consistent with the Muhammad of Islam?
So the only way we can make it work as a proposition, as an overall, if you look at all of the evidence, is that the term or the predicate Mahmed has got some sort of meaning, and it wasn't just a person's name. Because
Yes.
okay, in some context you could say, here it's person's name in this context, but not in every case. When you look at the
No. No.
wide
That's right.
spectrum, it doesn't work with
Yeah.
all of them,
No.
and that's
But
that's
let's.
the difference
Yeah.
between a
But there's.
hypothesis working versus not working. It's when you have
That's
these
right.
contradictions, you know.
That's right. But let me go back to this question that I got it, in point number 4, right? Is
Yeah,
any of those coins, are they consistent with the Muhammad of the sin?
I would say no.
No. The Muhammad of the sin would not have crosses on his coins. The Muhammad of the sin would not be with fire altars. And the Muhammad of the sin would definitely not be with a Jewish lampstand.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So this means that by the 7th century, MHMD does not necessarily, this is the key phrase, not necessarily, guys, does not necessarily have to refer to a man named Muhammad. It could just as easily be a predicate for the praised one. Okay? Predicate for the praised one. So who is this praised one? Well, for Christians, it could be Jesus. For the Jews, it could be their coming Messiah. For the Zoroastrians, it could be someone else entirely. Okay? We're not, and so what we're saying is these are hypotheses and these are reasonable. This is a reasonable hypothesis, right? And we have at least one 8th century source that mentions the so-called Mamed, which is also consistent with the term being a descriptive predicate. So-called, remember? One way to interpret that word is so-called. It's not the only way to translate it, I agree, but it's one way to translate it. And it fits with the rest of the hypothesis. So what we're doing is we've got it's like I say this before, it's like we're in a court, right? Okay, you've got Islam is on trial, right? The sin is on trial, and you and I are like the prosecution, and Ali Dawah and all those guys are like the defense attorneys, right? We've all got the same set of facts to work with, historical facts, right? We construct our hypothesis that the sin is not historical and that the Muhammad of the sin can't be found in history. They construct their hypothesis that he can. We all use the same set of historical facts and archaeological facts. I just believe our hypothesis has more legs than theirs.
yeah, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
That's it.
And so,
Yeah,
and so I think I want to be okay. So here's the conclusion, and I sum it up here. There may well have been an Arab leader during the 7th century who was referred to by non-Arab sources. There may well have been. I'm not saying, I won't go as far as, I'm not sure if Jay still says this, but in the past he says that Muhammad never existed. Well, somebody probably existed. Okay. I'm prepared, and I'll go on record, I'm prepared to say that could have been a king like King Arthur. All right. There was somebody that the legend was based on. But did he have a round table? Probably not. Did he pull a sword out of a stone? And and all that stuff? Maybe not. Okay. But there might have been an Arab leader during the 7th century who was referred to by non-Arab sources. This person's name was most likely not Muhammad. That's the key.
yeah,
This guy was not Muhammad. His name was, I contend that on the balance of probabilities, again, we're looking at the courtroom, balance of probabilities, it wasn't Muhammad. Okay. It was most likely Mahmet, or something like that. A two-syllable word with two vowels. And for Christians in the Middle East, the term Mahmed was also possibly a predicate for Jesus. So whoever this Mahmed or Mahmet was, it is likely that he was not the Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative.
yeah.
Right? And this suggests that the Muhammad described by the sin may not have existed. But here's the problem for Muslims. Muhammad is the most important part of the sin outside of Allah. All right. And if this part of the sin is not historical, then how can we trust the rest of the standard Islamic narrative? And I rest my case.
Excellent, excellent. There's so much more that could be added to this, but I think the way you've laid it out, it's best to keep it concise,
Yes.
and so people can see the logical steps and just view the argument for what it is. This is not
Yeah.
100% proof, but it is certainly a very strong hypothesis that that is an alternative to just accepting the standard Islamic narrative,
Yes.
because there
Yeah.
are some that will say that the only show in town is the standard Islamic narrative, and
No.
I disagree. I think
Yes.
there's other
Yes.
possibilities, and we should lay out
Yes.
the other possibilities, and that's all we're doing. We're laying out
Yes.
this is another possibility. I find it very plausible,
Yes. Well, thank
and
you.
I'm not going to oversell it, but this is a great way of looking at the argument.
So
So
I'm going to
thank you.
stop sharing. There you go.
Yeah,
And I think before we finish, like um, I, 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 I mean, Robert Kerr said like, just a couple of things on oral tradition before we finish. And this
yeah,
is just for people to, you know, I highly recommend, Stephen Shoemaker's book, Creating the Quran. Whilst I don't agree with a lot of his conclusions, his 2 chapters or 3 chapters on oral tradition are fantastic. You know,
yeah, yeah.
he actually goes through all of the memory science, you know, and looking at how people, forget 75% of what they hear within 1 week. Um, and he also looks at oral cultures and how can they record things verbatim, you know, um, and he shows that they don't. And then Professor Kerr says this, he says there has been extensive research done on oral tradition. I read much of it among Inuit, because he's from Canada, right? The indigenous people of Canada. The basic conclusion is that in isolated and homogeneous communities with no written tradition, oral tradition can remain very much intact. When such communities come into the outside world, becoming more heterogeneous, oral traditions cease to be transmitted reliably. Then he goes on to say the preconditions for long-term oral tradition exist in antiquity, even in the Medina of the sin. So, you got scholars from different angles saying that
That
the
last
oral
30
tradition
seconds,
that they
that
took.
last 30 seconds couldn't be heard. Sorry. Can you repeat that quote again? Because
Okay,
unfortunately, because the internet signal,
okay.
it just
He
went
says,
out there.
sure, yeah. He says that there's been extensive research done on oral tradition. I read much of it among the Inuit. The basic conclusion is that in isolated and homogeneous communities with no written tradition, oral tradition can remain very much intact. But when such communities come into the contact with the outside world, becoming more heterogeneous, exposed to written culture, oral traditions cease to be transmitted reliably. He says there's rather extensive literature on the subject. Here's the important quote. And this is a quote, I'll quote Professor Kerr. The preconditions for reliable and long-term oral tradition did not exist for Arabs in late antiquity, even in the Mecca and Medina of what you term the sin, right? So
Wow.
what we're saying is that from my linguistic approach, or no, I won't call it linguistic, from my just common sense sort of schoolboy type approach, it doesn't work. Robert Kerr is saying it doesn't work. Shoemaker is saying it doesn't work. Their old tradition. It doesn't
Yeah,
work, guys.
yeah, it doesn't.
No, it
No.
doesn't.
And
So
and like the only way that people can memorize things reliably is if they have a written text that they
100%,
consult,
100%.
and they learn it off the
Yeah, as
text. They basically,
that's right.
because you can't even if you have a group of people trying to remember a common, I don't know, even like a speech or something.
Yeah,
If it's not written down, it's going to drift because there's
that's right. That's
nothing
right. And
to hold it together.
that's right. That's right. And that's why, the Muslims make a big deal of saying, oh, we've got people who memorize the Quran by the time they're like 10 years old and blah, 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 blah. That's because they've got something they can read to memorize.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And that's why I again recommend Shoemaker's work. There's a guy who actually did research on just trying to remember stuff that he heard. I
yeah,
think the most he got to was 50 words.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like nothing written down, just what he heard, right? 50 words is the most he got to.
mm,
And last I checked, the Hadith and the Quran have a lot more than 50 words. Anyway,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
being facetious. But
yeah.
anyway, look, thanks, Mel. I mean, maybe we can do another
That was
video or a
fantastic.
follow up, or you know.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll
but yeah,
let's let's hear what the audience have to say on the argument. I'm
yeah,
sure they will be pleasantly not surprised, but We'll
Well,
say they will appreciate the argument and appreciate its strengths. I think it's a good
yeah,
one. Um, and it's
yeah,
great to have someone like
and
yourself
I
with your
yeah,
background to kind of
yeah.
analyze it
Thanks, Mel.
in
I
a lots of different
appreciate
ways.
everything you do, and yeah, I appreciate everything you do, and keep doing what you're doing. And I just want people to understand that when I'm not trying to make too much of this, I'm just saying that whoever this person was, he wasn't Muhammad. And I'm coming at it from, just simple words and phonetics. It doesn't
Yeah,
work. So whoever wants to disagree with me, fine, disagree with me, but don't just engage in ad hominem because that's just boring.
yeah,
Okay.
it is. Yeah.
Address my points, address my arguments. Okay, and show me where we're mistaken. If I'm mistaken, more than happy to review.